But for today, I will pick up where I left off last Thursday, which was the introduction to a subject of, I suppose you could say, spirituality in working life. And it's part of a series of teachings which I've been giving that start from fairly mundane sort of habits and practices and work towards more esoteric and transcendental ones. And at the moment we are looking at the sort of practices and values which prepare the readiness of the mind to be more receptive to transcendental teachings. And although I've talked about working life several times along the way through these sequence of talks, in the old days it used to be just talking about not being too reluctant to work hard in your workplace, or mastering your craft if you're working on something, to show your skills in your working life to get that sort of job satisfaction. But by this point in the blessings, which is blessing number 18, we're starting to talk more about the ethics of one's working life. And last Thursday I talked about something called right livelihood, which means trying to be a little bit selective about the sort of nature of the work which one is doing, so that it conforms as much as possible with one's conscience. So to do something to change the world in a good way through the work that one is doing, more than just being a salary. But the second part, which I'll continue with today, is also about blameless work. It's not so much on the ethics anymore, because I think I probably have gone into enough detail on that already, but it's more about things like how we get along well with our co-workers, so that our work is also blameless in the way that we get along with others in the workplace, in order to avoid personal conflicts and that sort of thing. So irrespective of the nature of the work you do, you need to cultivate good human relationships, otherwise you might also risk blame in the workplace and undermine either your own or other people's job satisfaction as a result. So let's start with the sort of Western way of looking at relationships in the workplace. And there was a software CEO called Jim Belozic, who offered 5 secrets for developing a better working relationship with your manager, because productive and respectful relationships between a manager and their employees is key to any company's success. So while the manager's top priority might be sort of hard-working employees who fulfill the company vision, it's probably safe to say they'd also like to have more than superficial relationships with their employees every day. Because after all, they probably spend more time with you lot than they do even with their own families. So also there's something in it for the employees too, because the manager usually plays quite an important role in your opportunities for advancement. So the more they know you and your work ethic, then the more likely you are to do well in your career path. So a good and a healthy, respectful relationship with your employer and your manager can improve your morale and also productivity, and ultimately your career. So if you want a relationship that gets beyond like, we get along fine, then you might try some of the following suggestions. So firstly, it might be down to you to take the initiative to set up at least monthly meetings with your employer. If it's a small business, then maybe you meet up with one another quite a lot anyway, but if it's a larger one, you may need to take more of the initiative. Because especially if it's quite a large outfit that you work for, then it might be difficult for a manager to check in with every employee every day. So they have no idea really what you're working on. So it's important that you take the initiative yourself to set up individual meetings with your boss. And it helps you know what's going on in business and shows that you care about your job and what the goals and expectations you have in your mind. And it's good because it creates time to talk about the things that you're working on and present your ideas for the future, and to check to make sure that you're still on track with whatever your manager's goals and strategies are. Second thing is that demonstrating innovation and initiative may be a good thing. Or depending on your manager, it might be good to pretend that all the innovation and so on is your boss's idea. But not being afraid to raise your hand and volunteer something new is generally seen as a good thing. It shows that you're contributing something. Having open communication allows for you to give feedback on your boss's ideas, which may or may not be a good idea depending on their personality, but it's one way to get to learn about their personality also. But by open communication, it means that both sides are open to the other's feedback. And although you may be the employee, but generally you're also the specialist, and you are in touch with the reality of the working life more than someone who is managing you, because they are looking more at the figures and they're sitting in their office rather than being involved with whatever it is that your workplace is producing. So actually, if they are quite an open-minded sort of manager, they ought to be keen to listen to what you have to say, because firstly, your training may have been more up-to-date than theirs. Also, you may be more of a true specialist than they are in certain subjects that you work for, whereas they would be more generalist and just be looking out for a variety of different people who work for them. Sometimes it may be also appropriate to be more informal with your boss. Allowing for them to show that you care about them as a person rather than just as a person who sort of controls your career prospects. Yeah. And also, you ought to be able to feel that you can be yourself at work. This may mean being open about possible things that might encroach on your ability to do your job without sort of presenting yourself as weak somehow. But if they know about other things going on in your life, then they may be able to adapt your workload in order that you can avoid any trouble that's brewing outside the office for you in other aspects, whether it's something you're studying for, you need time to do revision for exams, or there may be some drama going on in your family that you can tell them about, that maybe they can allow for in your workload as well. So allowing you to be yourself ought to make for a productive working relationship. I throw these in because the advice that's passed down from the Buddhist tradition, which you might realize is like about 2,000 years old, comes from a very different time and a very different sort of set of relationships between boss and employee. You know how it's different? Well, in the old days, if you were employed by someone, generally you lived on site at your workplace. So your boss not only gave you work, but they also basically looked after your whole living arrangements as well. Most people would have their whole family with them in their place of work. So actually most of the advice goes quite deep in terms of the boss almost treating their employees like extended family. But a lot of this advice may also be relevant in the present day and age. So this teachings actually come from a part of the Buddhist scriptures called the Sigalovada Sutta, which you may have heard of, the 6 directions in Buddhism. And this is one of the directions, which is the relationship between employer and employee. Because also we pick up a lot of habits which may be relevant to our spiritual cultivation from the way we do our work. So the first of these is to allocate appropriate work, which means that an employer ought to take into account a person's age, health, disposition, and capability in the task which they delegate to that employee, given that for each person it might not be quite the same, but for their work to be rewarding, then it ought to be something that's appropriate to them. For example, I once heard in Belgium that when one of their employees was pregnant, then they gave them a completely different set of tasks to do at work, which didn't involve heavy lifting, for example, which I thought was a nice touch. Secondly, to give appropriate food and remuneration. So thinking back to living on site, then the catering arrangements ought to be also adequate. And it also brings up a point which is a little bit different between Asian and Western work culture, to do with a remuneration, which is, I don't know about in the UK, but certainly in the US, unless you bring up the subject of a raise in pay, you will not get one. How about UK? Okay, a little bit more Asian style. In Asian style, you have to look like you could do with a raise in pay before you get one. And they have to guess? No? So you get it automatically? Or not at all, maybe? Okay, so you can complain about the structure not being clear, or you cannot complain. Except complaints are not acceptable? No. So a little bit more like Asia then. Yes, in Asia you don't bring up this subject. But it's down to the manager being a generous sort of person who feels noblesse oblige, and they ought to be paying valuable people more without having to be asked about it. Yes. So there you go. UK is a little bit closer to Asian style culture. Third thing is taking care of employees in times of illness. In the US, it would be what's known as a generous health care plan, and also not being asked to take health risks in the course of your working duties. Not being paid danger money, in other words. Fourth one, quite cute in some ways, from time to time to give your employees delicacies. Delicacies? Yes. I think it's probably what in the modern day might translate as bonuses, or maybe prizes for employee of the month from time to time. Yeah, delicacies. And being allowed holidays on occasion. So usual working calendar and national festivities and on request. So any employer who looks after the employees in these nice, cute ways, then they would be looked up to by their employees, in theory, in a way that they would want to keep up their side of the bargain. So what is the employee side of the bargain? You notice that mostly for these teachings from the Sigalovada Sutta, it's not about rights, it's about mutual duties towards one another. And it's hoped that both sides in any particular pair will keep up their side of the bargain. So what are employees supposed to do for all this nice treatment? They're supposed to start work before their employer and finish work after them. So how about teachers? Who arrives in the school first in the morning? Okay, so good for you. And probably they're marking homework long after everyone else has gone home as well. Second thing is, yes, for before and after. Third thing is only taking things expressly given to you by your boss. They have a thing called petty workplace theft these days, is the current terminology for it. And these days it seems to have moved on from occasional office supplies to much more serious crimes like embezzlement, data theft, identity theft, or have you heard of sweethearting? Yeah, well, you learned something. I also learned something as well. Basically it means, let's say you work at the checkout in the supermarket. If you know some of the customers, you can constantly give them coupons or reductions on things because you know them. So you are their sweetheart sort of thing. Yes, and not allowed. Yes, they're not considered behaviors worthy of a trustworthy employee. You should look for ways to do your work better than before, improve your efficiency, and not try to use it as a bargaining chip to negotiate wage rises. And last but not least, try to maintain and defend your boss's or manager's good reputation. If both sides are maintained, then generally work-place relationships will be quite cordial. But obviously, if one side or the other doesn't live up to their side of the bargain, then there will be a breakdown of relationships, in which case you come to problems which are better avoided where possible. So, in the case that one side or the other does not keep up their side of the bargain, then obviously it needs to be moved on to the next stage, and sometimes it can get quite ugly and destructive. If people are paid by the hour, then they go on a go slow. If they are paid on piece rate pay, then they turn in shoddy work as a protest. If they can do a lot of other things to try to create friction for their employer, like things like data theft, which I mentioned earlier. Employers can get nasty too. They can do more monitoring and surveillance and make their life for their employees increasingly unpleasant. As I said, it's better if these can be avoided before it happens. If employees are not very satisfied with their working life, it's actually bad for everyone, because they would tend to take their pleasures elsewhere in a more destructive way. And one way or another, it tends to lead to debt problems, and debt is never seen as a good thing, especially in Buddhist culture. Some people think that if you're a Buddhist, you have to try to be poor. What do you reckon? well, for monks it's all right, okay, to be poor. But generally speaking, it's not seen as a good thing to be poor. It's to be sort of reasonably comfortable, so that you have the flexibility and time and lack of worry so that you can do more spiritual things in your life. So debt is seen as a particularly insidious problem with poverty. Yeah, so not to be encouraged. Today I'll finish with a little story, and it goes back a little bit to the ethics I was talking about last Thursday. And it's about honesty and dishonesty in the workplace. And it comes from a part of the scriptures quite early on called the Serivā Jātaka. And you notice it comes in at number 3, so quite an early lifetime of the Bodhisattva when he was working his way towards being a Buddha in the future. And the Buddha-to-be is sometimes known as the Bodhisattva, so the one seeking for enlightenment. And during that particular lifetime, he had a job as a door-to-door salesman. Not selling encyclopedias, no, but he would go house to house, sometimes selling goods and trinkets, and sometimes buying goods and trinkets from that the householders offered him. And one day, along with another rather more greedy door-to-door salesman, he crossed a river and entered a city called Andapura. And in that city, there was a family that had fallen on hard times. And the sole survivors in the family were a girl and her grandmother. And the greedy salesman, so not the Bodhisattva, he went around the town, and also the honest one, the Bodhisattva, went around town also selling the wares. And the Bodhisattva came to, when once the little girl saw these salesmen were out and about, then she begged her grandmother to be able to buy a trinket or two from the salesman. But all they had to pay for it with was a very old-looking golden-coloured bowl, which they believed was gold-plated. In fact, the bowl was a family heirloom that was solid gold, but they didn't realize that, because it had lost its luster, and neither the old woman or the granddaughter realized its value. So first of all, the greedy salesman turned up at the door, and in return for one of his or two of his trinkets, he was shown the bowl, which would be given in exchange. And he scratched it with a needle, and he knew it was solid gold underneath. But because he wanted to have it for nothing, he said it wasn't worth half a farthing, and he made a show of throwing it down and stomping out of the house. A little bit later on, the honest door-to-door salesman came along, the Bodhisattva, and he was offered the same bowl in return for some of his trinkets. And unlike the previous salesman, he told the lady and the granddaughter the truth, and he said that if you want to give me this in payment, then I'm going to give you everything I have to sell here, and all the money I have, just keeping back the money to pay the ferryman on the way back. So he gave them his entire stock in exchange for this bowl, and just had 8 pieces of money for the journey back. And then he made his way quickly down to the docks and boarded a boat to cross the river. Meanwhile, the greedy salesman went back the second time to the house in the hope of that the 2 ladies had changed their mind, and when he found out that they'd already done the sale on the golden bowl, he went what they would call ballistic, and he threw down everything he had and ran directly down to the river, calling out to the honest salesman, who was now midstream, stop, come back, you can't do this. And eventually he had a heart attack, yes, and did not die in a good way. In fact, he was very vengeful as he was dying, and that vengefulness actually went on to carry over for many lifetimes. So, have you heard of someone called Devadatta? A particularly sort of badly behaved monk in the final lifetime of the Buddha. He did some naughty things, like trying to get an elephant drunk to stamp on the Buddha, and throwing boulders down a mountain on top of the Buddha, a few naughty things like that in his final lifetime. Well, apparently it started back in that lifetime with being the honest and the dishonest salesman. So sort of an aside to this story is, don't underestimate the danger of vengefulness, because especially if you die with that sort of emotion on your mind, it will carry over for a long, long time. It's very hard to overcome it at all. Yes, so workplace honesty, that's what that story is supposed to demonstrate today. For those of you who are new to meditation today, I'd like to encourage you to meditate further if you can, and a good place to start is maybe by finding 20 minutes a day at home to meditate. Maybe first thing in the morning, maybe last thing at night, but if you start with 20 minutes, then that's a length of time where you'll start to see some progress for yourself day by day. You may have good days, you may have bad days, but on aggregate you will see a gradual improvement in your practice. And if you become more inspired by your practice, then you can gradually increase on that length of time as well. Generally, once you know the method, then you will go home, be inspired to practice, and generally that inspiration will last about 7 days, after which it will sort of wear off. There's this sort of 7-day rule, which they know about in all the religious traditions, which is one of the reasons why they ask you to go to church every Sunday, for example. So, to remind yourself of the meditation method, there's an app which you can download and listen to audio tracks on, which will help to keep your inspiration going, hopefully. And you can set a timer in 20 minutes, find a meditation instruction to fit with the time which you've set for yourself. Also, we have classes going on here normally on every Tuesday and Thursday evening, but these will be suspended during the month of August and pick up again in September. But saying that, anyone who's really intent on coming to the temple can probably join in sitting at the back from 6 o'clock onwards. There's usually evening chanting and meditation. So if you really want to come to meditation, you're always welcome to drop in and meditate. Either then or any other time of the day, then we do have a little white room where you can go and meditate in peace and quiet, hopefully, as well. Also online, which I do believe will continue regardless, every Saturday evening online via Zoom between 7 and 8 British time. There's a talk and meditation held for meditators throughout Europe, which some of you are already familiar with. Our next weekend retreat coming up probably here will be between 16th and 18th of September. Usually they charge just £75 for the weekend, which is fairly Spartan accommodation. You can see left and right here, 2 meals a day, but it is nice and close to home. The reason why we are busy during August is that we are giving our pastoral care and training to the youngsters who have time out of school. So for the boys, that they'll actually be reporting in for duty on Friday, and we hope to get to 10 youngsters, boys, in for the first 2 weeks. And you'll see them as novices around the middle of the month, the ordination should be actually about the 5th of August. Yeah. So they will be little monks for 2 weeks, and then they can change back and go back to school in September. Yes. For the ladies, it's a slightly shorter retreat schedule between the 26th and 28th, and we are combining the training for adults and for youngsters. So girls have got their own set of activities, so 10-year-olds upwards, with slightly more fun, slightly less meditation. For the adults, it's slightly less fun and more meditation. Yes, 26th to 28th. Also, I'd like to give a heads up for the almsgiving that we're doing in Jubilee Square in Woking on the 13th of August. If you're normally doing your shopping in Peacocks on the Saturday morning, then you can join in with that along the way. We haven't been able to organize that for a couple of years, but it's something that we've done in the past. This is the 4th time we're organizing it, but we have the new mayor joining us as well. It should be quite a good event. And all the food given to the monks during the almsgiving, including the novices as well, will then be donated to the food bank in Woking. And we have our temple open day on the very next day, which is Sunday the 14th of August, between 2:15 and 4. It's a chance for people who are normally too scared to come and look inside the temple to have a chance to satisfy their curiosity about what goes on here. Yes, indeed. So that's probably all for today, apart from saying a big thank you to those who filled in the questionnaires as well. I'll try to put all this together into some sort of report by October. I have to give a paper on that, so hopefully all the contributions you've made for that will come out as a sort of graph which will prove something by October. So for today,